Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with a good friend, Bart Caylor, founder of Caylor Solutions in Fishers, Indiana, to discuss marketing and enrollment trends in biblical and Christian higher education. What's he seeing that's working to enroll mission-fit students? Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education, and a familiar face. If you're watching us online, you already know who the guest is. If you're any way associated with ABHE, you know that we have a great connection and partnership with Bart Caylor, who, in fact, Bart, we were together a couple of weeks ago, and we were reminiscing kind of when you started the connection with ABHE, and it's been, what, 12 years?
12, 13 years, something like that.
Wow. Time definitely flies. So it was actually fun. I wasn't around ABHE then, but you obviously were kind of coming in. So it was fun recounting some of those stories of how you connected in. But Bart Caylor, Caylor Solutions, a huge friend of ABHE, biblical and Christian higher education. And those of you who are long-timers know the name Tim Fuller, who the Lord took from us coming up on 2 years ago, which is really hard to imagine. But if you were to say two key people who worked in our space, it was you, Bart, and Tim. And I know that you had a great relationship and friendship with him. It was business, but it was probably even more importantly, very personal one. So, Bart, you've been a guest on my show before, so welcome back.
Thank you.
And it was one of the first episodes, and I'd like to think that our podcast has come a long way since then. Yeah. And you have a podcast too. Tell us a little bit about it.
I do. I have a podcast called The Higher Ed Marketer. We just celebrated our 200th episode, and so we've been at it since late 2020. And so very blessed for that. Had an opportunity to build a lot of relationships across all of higher education. Mm-hmm. So a great chance to not only, have a lot of conversations within biblical and Christian higher ed, but also a little bit of salt and light learning from other folks too, and bringing that to everyone that I can.
And I've so appreciated that. And my listeners, you definitely, if you're not already, definitely worth connecting into Bart's podcast. A lot of helpful information, even if you're not in the marketing recruitment world. It's amazing to me, some of the just basic principles that rise above type of institution, even position within institution, whether it's a secular institution or a private institution or Christian or biblical or a seminary. We're all kind of dealing with the same kinds of things. So I definitely encourage you to tune into that. Bart, I asked you to come in just to kind of, since the last time we were together, a lot has changed. Even how I do the podcast is shifting and changing, and I'm not so focused on scripts and what I'm looking at. So this is just a conversation where we can pick your brain a little bit and kind of what you see happening out there in the marketing and recruitment side of things. Let's start off with the enrollment cliff. Part of me is so incredibly sick and tired of talking about the enrollment cliff. Yep. But at the same time, it's a reality, and we're over the cliff now, right?
We are free falling right now. So
okay, good. So at least it's no longer anticipatory. We are actually in free fall, coming down the cliff. So give us an update. And anything shifted, changed? What are you seeing talk wise around the cliff?
Well, and a lot of people too you have to realize that this is very regional. If you're listening to this, you're like, we're doing better than we've ever done. That might be regional. A lot of the southern states are doing better than what they have in the past. A lot of the northern states like Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, those are going to be some challenging places. And just for everybody to know, the enrollment cliff, the whole thing is, after the Great Recession, 18 years ago, people stopped having children for a while. There's just a supply and demand issue right now at the number of traditional undergrad students. And keep in mind, this is whenever you hear about the enrollment cliff, it's traditional undergrad. That's not to say that those 1 in 4 adults who have some college but not a degree, they're still out there. They're still out there to recruit and do enrollment for. So there are ways to get around the impact of the enrollment cliff by being creative in the way that you were looking at other marketing options and other channels. But I think one of the things just to kind of keep in mind too, a lot of people have been talking about the enrollment cliff for years. It is a reality. There are other issues that I would say that maybe are more pressing that people are ignoring. And one would be what's called the search cliff. And so the search cliff is the sense
Is
that,
this, so am I going to have to add this to my vocabulary now?
I don't know. You might not, you might have to, I don't know. But just to give you a quick understanding of what that is. So a lot of schools, a lot of the bigger schools will buy names. And so when they do search marketing, which is kind of the top of the funnel, they'll purchase names from like College Board and Quora and other places that are buying names when students sign up for the PSAT, the ACT, the SAT. With the fact that a lot of schools went test optional during the pandemic, a lot fewer schools are requiring testing and a lot fewer students are actually taking testing. And so there's going to be less names to buy. And so that's going to be another opportunity to think about how are ways that you can start either getting into the watering holes or building relationships through the church or other places that maybe haven't been tapped into as much as before, but that's another thing to think about.
Where is the buying? I cut my teeth in higher education and in the enrollment office in the early days where you actually had 3x5 cards where you wrote your notes on before the glorious computer. And we would buy card decks and names from, is that, I mean, it's top of funnel for sure. Is that necessarily a bad thing that there's not as many? Because it always felt like those were pretty, to actually get that to an actual application was a bit of a stretch sometimes.
I don't think it's a bad thing because I think it's going to force people it's going to shake them to wake them type of thing. Because I think you're right. I mean, back in the day, it was you bought names from Campus Life magazine and you would get those cards and then it became the testing. And I think that you're right. I think that in a lot of ways in the last 30 years, schools have become very reliant and almost lackadaisical in their approach to that. And it's like, oh, we'll just buy more names. And that does not actually increase yield. I mean, Tim Fuller, as you mentioned earlier, who used to say, more bad names at the top doesn't mean you're going to get more, at the bottom. And so much of what we do in recruitment and enrollment has to do with those relationships that we build, not only with the students, but their influencers, whether it's parents, whether it's pastors, whether it's, coaches and teachers. And so we're going to have to get more focused on how do we get creative in the way that we build those relationships, because that idea of, broadcasting, 100,000 emails out or names out isn't going to work anymore. We have to be more strategic and more thoughtful in the approach.
Yeah, for sure. We're in the free fall. You had mentioned that this is what we're talking about, traditional undergraduate students.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bit of a lag indicator or the pig in the python. I mean, these students will become obviously older. And so in adult education, it may be a bit of a delayed reaction where the cliff doesn't necessarily impact them for another 4 or 5 years as those students, work through and become adults. So while things may be good for them now, they may need to be preparing for it, just like traditional undergraduate has as well. I like how you brought out too, there are nuances to the cliff that there are definitely sectors so regionally it's not as bad. So enrollment offices, you get on a lot of campuses, you do consulting, any new best practices that you're seeing emerging in enrollment offices?
I don't know if it's a new best practice, but it is definitely a best practice that I'd like to see a lot more ABHE schools move toward, is a more disciplined approach to enrollment. I still run across a lot of schools, and they might be some of the smaller ones, but you're still operating off of, spreadsheets and a little bit of reactionary type of engagement with communications. Getting a good CRM is just a basic best practice. And I know that people are like, oh, I've looked at Slate, I've looked at Element 451. Yeah, those are the big boys and those are the big ones. But I would encourage you, even if you get into a small pipeline, something that's just simple, that's a few dollars a month, doing that kind of work to just put some discipline into how do you communicate with students? How do you run them through the process? And then just as well as just understanding the basics of enrollment management and enrollment marketing. I still find that a lot of schools are acting like, a catcher with a catcher's mitt, hoping that they're going to get that pitch and that student's just going to call one day and then we'll get them enrolled and get them in the classes. And it takes a lot more effort than that. And it also takes a lot more science to be able to track that across the year. I think that the idea of being able to have a weekly funnel report that you're sharing with your leadership, and as a president, you should be asking for that. You should be saying, hey, where are we at these different levels of the funnel? How many people do we have that have, raised their hand and said, I'm interested in learning more about your school? How many people have actually started an application? How many people do you have the application completed where you have their transcripts and all the materials that you asked for, and that's finalized? And then, what's it like when they've been accepted? What do you have a way for them to have some skin in the game in the form of a deposit or some kind of commitment, so that when you go ahead and register them and enroll them and matriculate them, that they're going to show up for those meetings? And so there is some discipline that needs to be put into that process that I think is still, some of our smaller institutions are still learning that. And that's where I think that coming to the professional development that ABHE has in the fall or an annual meeting could really get you a lot further down the road with that.
And there's some great products out there. I run into sometimes the excuse that, boy, it's just too expensive. A CRM is too expensive for us. But there are some pretty basic ones out there, and even some that are the larger ones that have kind of a stripped down version as kind of their entry in, which is still just as powerful. And I always encourage, if you don't have a CRM, you've got to get one, and just start small, start building out some campaigns, because the competition is, and that's who you're up against, are recruiting students. And those institutions have very complex CRMs in place. If you're still on spreadsheets, from an recruiting experience, that student isn't necessarily getting the best from a school that doesn't have a CRM.
Yeah. And just, I want to kind of piggyback on what you said about competition. Don't think your competition are the other ABHE or CCCU schools. Your competition is the state flagships, the community colleges, and life. Those are your three biggest competitors. And so if you can focus on that and talk about those as your competitors, that you're going to be in a much better mindset.
Yeah. And I think it goes to, we're going to talk about this a little bit kind of in our last question, about one of the highest revolving door offices on our campuses are in enrollment, because we're hiring so many younger people. And I think the other thing that a CRM does is it creates some of that consistency, some of that science, that regardless of who you have in the positions, your contact with students doesn't ebb and flow based off of who the person is. It's more on the system that you have in place, and that there's a bit of consistency. I saw an article maybe 6 years ago. It was right before I started with ABHE, that was talking about leveraging CRMs. Like, it was kind of an ideological recruitment process that was basically, even when the students are enrolled, you're still needing to recruit them. And they were leveraging their CRMs post-enrollment to maintain that contact. Are you seeing that? Like 6 years later, after I saw that, and there was there's some talk in some conferences about there, are you seeing schools leverage CRMs or maintain that contact as if they're continually recruiting the student through to graduation?
Yeah, that's one of the new emerging areas that I think is really important for enrollment and what I would say just marketing in general, is the sense that sometimes we forget that we have to constantly sell people and remind them of why they've made the commitment. And that even starts with, why did they raise their hand at the beginning? And so every step of the funnel is an opportunity to underscore why your institution is a good choice for them, why it's a good choice, as well as making sure that their influencers are on the comm plan, so that mom is getting that email that says, oh, don't forget to do this, or that they're understanding the reasons why coming. But yeah, I think that a lot of times schools are starting to realize that they spend a lot of time, and I liken it to a marriage. I mean, too many times schools will, on the first date, will you marry me? Ask you to apply now. And we're not wooing them throughout the process. And then they arrive on campus, and then all of a sudden it's like, old married couple. We don't talk to them. We don't do anything with them. We just take them for granted because they're now students. And then all of a sudden when they graduate, well, now we start wooing them again because we want to do advancement work and we want to do development work. And so I think there's a missed opportunity for that student experience for the 2, 4, however long we have them as a student, to not do a complete, handoff to the registrar into student life, but to continue that process of retention marketing, of understanding that every semester they make another decision. Am I going to come back? And a lot of students just are going to come that. They've got a great experience. They're a mission fit student. They're going to be there. But there's a lot of students who go home and it's like, do I really want to go back? And they struggle. And we need to make sure that that is just easy for them to decide that, yes, there's no question I'm going to come back. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
retention is a big issue.
Yeah. If you look at the numbers too, on 20 to 40% of attrition, transfer out rates, whatever it happens to be over the 4-year period of time. And it's a whole lot easier to sell somebody who's already in the system, already there on campus, than somebody who's not. And I think that's a critical piece. The other thing you mentioned, I think is such an important element, is weekly reporting up to the president and the cabinet, the stats on the admissions funnel. And I'm sure you've seen it. Some people have criticized the funnel and say it's no longer a funnel. It's a inverted funnel. I saw somewhere that it's not a funnel, it's an inverted triangle. Pretty sure that's a funnel, or a square, or rectangular,
whatever you call it. Yes,
it doesn't matter.
It's a process.
Don't get caught up in whether you have a funnel or an inverted triangle. The key is that you're reporting data. And the thing about higher education that you can really take advantage of is it's cyclical. We can anticipate so much. I mean, it is lockstep. We are still in this September to August kind of framework, even though we have non-traditional.
Yeah.
A lot of our world is still based off of that kind of ebb and flow. So longitudinal data, and if you have your data points over time and the cabinet and the president are continually updated on the numbers, it avoids surprises, number one, but number two, and I think more importantly, it informs your budgeting process of what you can anticipate. Could you have an outlier of a strange year that your conversion rate just isn't as good as what it has been in the last 5 years? And sure, that could happen, but you're eliminating those surprise opportunities. When you go on a campus, are you seeing the majority of time the practice of giving the numbers to the president and to the cabinet on a weekly basis?
Again, that goes back to the maturity and the size of the institution. I mean, it's not something it's something everybody could do. It's not that hard. It's just the discipline again. I'm seeing maybe probably 75% of the folks that I work with are doing that type of work. I still, a lot of times when I'm meeting, again, some of the smaller institutions, I'll start asking those questions when we first get engaged. And even though I'm coming in as a marketer, the marketing needs to have a benchmark. It needs to have some pattern in it, and there needs to be some ROI that we can track. And I'm surprised a lot of times where it's like, well, no, we really don't do much action until May. Like, well, sometimes that's a little bit late. There's a lot of opportunity to do things well before then. And so, yeah, it pings me sometimes when I see that, where it's like, oh, wow, there's so much more we could be doing here. There's so much more that you could be doing. Because what happens is a lot of times April rolls around and high alert goes on campus. And, I was on a campus recently where they did not have this discipline. They do now, but they didn't have this. And the way that they dealt with it is that, they would just have the entire faculty staff drop everything and make phone calls. And so if they had a list of, 1,000 students, the president would be splitting up 50 of them and just making phone calls. And there's just a lot of ways to do things that, one, don't get us in the position where we have to do that. And two, there's other automation tools that we can use to leave voicemails, because 90% of the calls are going to be voicemails. And because that would just became a more morale drain for the institution, that, okay, it's that time of year where we have to drop everything and do this. And
almost like a panic reactive mode, which a CRM solves a lot of those issues.
Yeah.
Like get in front of it when the key decision-making times are happening, like in the months of October, November, December, January, February, not in April.
And when you're reacting against things, that makes it so much harder. And instead of being proactive and being thoughtful.
Yep. And you could make another assumption too, and it's probably a generalization to say this, but I think it would be a valid one, that if a college student is still making a college decision in April, May, what's the quality of that student mission fit wise? Why is it that they're 2 months away and they're still trying to make the decision of what college to enroll? It's not the case all the time. But I would think that pool probably has a concentration of students who may not necessarily be good fits at an institution.
I think that's fair.
All right. So AI,
Yep.
You're all over this.
Yep.
You're seeing it being used in marketing. Now that you've been around it a lot, how are you seeing it being misused?
I would say the biggest way it's being misused, and I'm going to broaden it out, not just marketing, but let's just say across institutions. Oh, I've used ChatGPT before and I just wasn't impressed, so I stopped using it. Okay, that's number one misuse, is that one, you dismiss it. It's like having an intern and telling the intern, hey, I want you to write a blog post about our FAFSA, and it comes back bad because that's all you told them to do, and you fire them day one, and you're like, yeah, I'm never having an intern again. It's not the way we would work in person, and that's the way we're working with chat. So that's the first one. The second one is using it only for like, oh yeah, I use it to clean up my email. I occasionally use it. I used it 3 months ago, not using enough, not getting in there practicing. And then the third reason is kind of looking at it like, oh, it's just a parlor trick and a fad. It's not that big a deal. The attitude that you have toward generative AI, whether you like it or not, it's a reality. It's going to change our world. It's going to change everything about what we do. And the sooner that you can lean into it and understand it and get some basic skills in it. And again, I guess one of the other big concerns I have with institutions, and I'm doing a lot more presidential and cabinet presentations. One of the things I try to make sure that the executive leadership team understands is that this is not an IT issue. Don't try to push it into IT and just say, oh, well, they'll just figure it out. They'll take care of it. Because yes, that it is a computer issue, but if somebody knows how to use a browser or a Word, you can be very proficient and very, very successful with these tools. And so we're going to spend 3 hours here if I'm not careful, Philip. So I've got some passions here.
Yeah. No. Well, and I think it is. And just for our listeners, ABHE, we know that this is a big issue. In fact, Bart and I were together earlier this spring with a group of leaders who serve biblical and Christian higher education associations like CCCU, ABHE, and others. Yep. And I had Bart in to talk about kind of the future. And one of the ideas that was being hacked around, and I think we're going to do this at some point, is, boy, we need to get our hands around this so that we can better serve our member institutions, because there are a lot of questions out there. And as soon as you start talking AI, you have the full range of reaction. We're past, I think, the shock and awe of, and we've all, kind of attended those of like, the scary situations that are presented and the, oh my word, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And then reality is going to be somewhere in the middle. So I think we're at that level of conversation of saying, okay, what does it actually look like to use AI in marketing, in CRMs, in enrollment, registrars setting up course scheduling, student advising. Sky's the limit with this. So we're aware that we got to be having more conversations to help our institutions. But
I just constantly go back to the fact that, isn't it amazing that we live in a time where God's led us into this, where we can really impact the kingdom. And it reminds me a lot of times, I was at the very beginning of the internet as well. So in the early 1990s, I was doing my first websites in 1994, and I would.
Were you working with Al Gore then?
Yeah, because he had just invented it at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
So, that's right. But at that time, I was going and talking to a lot of nonprofits, a lot of Christian organizations and schools, and they were like, Bart, we just don't see why anybody would want to be on the internet. That's just a cesspool over there. 'Cause at the time, it was a lot of early stuff that wasn't that great. But boy, could you imagine now having chosen to not participate in what we know as the internet now?
Yep.
It's not. It's just part of it's a utility now. It's not an option.
Yeah, and that's where AI is going, and it's going to be figuring out how best to leverage it. I think we're beyond the days. Early on, the academic policies were, don't use it, you can't use it. I've seen a lot of schools kind of move beyond that and realize, no, this is here. How do we actually creatively bring this in? One of the trends that I'm seeing, I don't know if you're seeing this, is that we're having AI committees that are cross-sectional committees on college campuses that are having conversations about how do we get our hands around this and leverage it for good at our institution, which I think is a great approach because it touches everything. It's not just in one area, and it's not just ChatGPT.
No.
There is just so much. And there are software, I kind of mentioned a registrar building out a schedule. There are software companies that have develop local AI bots that sit on your data, closed to your institution.
Yep.
and puts together the best maximized schedule, knowing all of the students' curricular needs, putting together a schedule that has as least number of conflicts as possible, or a final exam schedule. Or that's my registrar background, that I would, painstakingly do all of that.
That's
but
right.
AI, it's just figuring it out, and that frees you up to do other things.
Gets rid of the chores. I mean, if we can figure out how can we get rid of the chores, think about how many chores we do a day. And we are called to be critical thinkers and creative and do other things rather than just move numbers around in a chart. And so I think those are one of the key elements that I really try to push.
Yeah. When we were together, was it you that shared a story about a radiologist and using AI? Tell that story.
Yeah. So this comes from Seth Godin, and he says that, if you're looking at AI, you have two choices. You're either going to be working with AI and having AI help you with your work, or you're going to be competing against AI. And if you're competing against AI, you have troubles, because an AI can study X-ray and give a diagnosis in 90% of the cases. So if you're a radiologist, you want to figure out how can you use AI to help you, as opposed to competing against AI. Because if you're competing against AI, you're going to lose. Mm-hmm. So,
Yep. And I recently saw a study that was done where they had a set of diagnostic tests and the results, and gave it to a doctor, a physical doctor, and then put it into AI to compare, what was one better than the other or more thorough. And the doctors were consistent, but AI, was about 10% better or sharper in being able to specifically diagnose an issue off of the realm of tests being done. So it's being used in so many different ways. And the question is, how can we do it?
And it's as bad as it will ever be. That's the last thing I want to say about it.
There you go. We have like a minute left here. Bart, in the last minute, I referenced this at the early part of the show, the revolving door of employees in enrollment.
Yeah.
Number one, is that still a reality? Is it still a revolving door? And then if that's true, how do colleges get ahead of that and make sure that they're not starting at square one every single time when they're hiring the next 22 or 23-year-old recruiting specialist in and having to train them and start over again? Are you seeing things that institutions are doing that can help with that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of trying to break that pattern. And part of breaking that pattern is providing a path forward for young employees can understand that, hey, this is actually a career path. This is actually something that I can invest my life in for the next 3 to 5 years, where I can get an assistant director or something like that. And so being able to do that, some schools are starting to look at other ways to incentivize those younger employees. The reality is that data shows us that these Gen Z students are going to have anywhere between 10 to 15 career changes in their life. So it's not uncommon for enrollment admissions counselors to rotate through pretty quickly. But if you can keep them for 2, 3, 4 years, you're well ahead of the majority. And part of that is training. Part of it's investing in them and giving them a reason to stick around.
Yeah. And part of it is adjusting your expectations, right?
Yep.
That's a key to any positive relationship. Is, do you still have high expectations and you know that the individuals are simply not going to meet those expectations? And I think colleges need to expect that you're going to have enrollment people around for 2, 3, 4 years. So adjust accordingly, knowing.
Exactly.
Now, could there be an outlier that you have a career person that comes in and they stick with it and, they're there 15 years? Absolutely. That sure is a possibility. But like you said, the averages are pretty alarming, that people are just sticking around at one place for 2, 3, 4 years, and they're looking beyond it. So adjust your expectations and having things like a CRM in place so that you're not losing ground every time you're losing an employee who is particularly passionate about this and they're gone, and now we're starting back over.
One thing
again.
That's creative that I've seen a couple schools do, and this is something just to throw out there, they are pulling in moms who have that raise their children, and now moms are coming in as admissions counselors at 45, 50. That's a pretty interesting idea and strategy to look at, is maybe look at other places that you think outside the box and how that might work, because moms can talk to other moms, and that's a big plus.
Exactly right. I've seen huge success using that. Bart, thank you. Appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experiences, and always good to talk to a friend.
Such an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. So check out the show notes, and in there I'll put a link over to Caylor Solutions, as well as the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. I really suggest that you subscribe to that, listen in, look at some of the back episodes that Bart has done. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.